Can Luke Skywalker be saved? Hello there, and welcome. Star Wars is in a bad space. Lucasfilm has been unable to get a Star Wars film made since The Rise of Skywalker came out in December of 2019. With many directors attached, many writers attached, and the project's either getting delayed or just shelved entirely. The series Lucasfilm has been putting out have either been divisive, to say the least, or outright rejected in their entirety. Except for The Mandalorian, but that's a bit of a different beast that I'll talk about later. What I really want to talk about in this video, ultimately, is how Star Wars got here. How Star Wars went from one of the most profitable franchises in cinematic history, and being a cultural juggernaut that damn near everyone could reference or had at least heard of, to a sad, pathetic franchise that can barely break even, constantly living in the shadow of the more successful and impactful MCU. But even that little star is currently fading. And, while I could point to many mishandlings made by Kathleen Kennedy and, by extension, Lucasfilm as a whole, as she steered this once beautiful franchise into an early grave, and has done pretty much everything in her power to cannibalize what's left, her greatest failure was how she allowed Luke Skywalker to be hollowed out, consumed, disrespected, and finally broken by Rian Johnson. But if we're going to understand how Luke Skywalker was broken, we first have to understand how George Lucas created the cinematic icon in the first place. While I hope to make a video one of these days, detailing exactly how Star Wars rose and fell, how George Lucas unleashed his imagination and birthed a true cultural event, for this video, I'm going to keep it relatively brief and focus on why Luke Skywalker connected with so many people right from the get-go. In attempting to give young children, specifically boys, the serialized sort of storytelling he enjoyed watching Flash Gordon when he was a child, Lucas utilized the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell to give the audience a hero they could connect with, and a character that would ground them when they needed to suspend their disbelief to follow the events set in a galaxy far, far away. And while you may have heard it all before, it's important to hear it again, to give context to why audiences were immediately rooting for the young Skywalker. He started out as a simple farm boy on a desert planet, searching for adventure out in the stars. He felt left behind as his friends were off experiencing the galaxy, while he was stuck in the same cycle with the same people in the same place. He felt that his destiny was greater than the life plotted out for him by his aunt and uncle. And he was right. After his new droid goes off in search of an Obi-Wan Kenobi to deliver a message to him, Luke bumps into the old hermit Ben Kenobi, who reveals the message is of great importance in the fight against tyranny, and that Luke's father was a powerful Jedi Knight, betrayed and murdered by Ben's former pupil, and that Luke himself must take up the charge and help dictate the course of galactic events. Despite initially refusing, Luke takes him up on his offer after finding his aunt and uncle murdered by the very tyrants the rebellion is trying to overthrow. Meeting Han and Chewbacca with Ben, they all escape Tatooine and head to Alderaan in an effort to rescue Princess Leia, all while Luke begins to learn the mysteries of the Force that are his birthright. Now, things don't go to plan as the group finds Alderaan destroyed and ends up on the Empire's terrible new weapon, and while Han and Luke get to help rescue the princess, Ben is killed before Luke's very eyes. This is an important moment for Luke, as it's the second instance of loss he's incurred in the film. First, his aunt and uncle are taken away from him, and now his mentor, a man he was slowly forming a deep attachment to. These two instances of loss serve to further motivate Luke to fight the Empire's tyranny and really form the core of his initial motivations to join the rebellion. At this point in the story, our heroes recover from the loss and, upon meeting back up with the Rebel Alliance, immediately set back out to destroy their superweapon, the Death Star, which is currently getting ready to destroy the rebellion. With help from Ben's spirit and a returning Han, Luke is able to make the impossible shot that destroys the Death Star, and is hailed as a rebellion hero. In A New Hope, Luke is us, the audience. He's our focal point for the story. I mean, we celebrate his achievements and mourn his losses because he's an everyman, thrust into impossible situations that require him to step up and do what has to be done in the face of abject tyranny. We relate to him because we've all yearned for something more at some point in our lives. We've all felt a pull towards some grander destiny than the life we're currently leading. His loss of Ben Kenobi resonates with us because we've all at some point lost someone who still had more to teach us. And the lessons Luke has to learn about standing up for what is right, even when it seems futile, are some of the most important lessons to take away from Star Wars, because they can apply throughout our lives. And sure, some of us may never be hailed as heroes, or earn medals, or have celebrations be thrown in our honor. We can all hold our heads up high knowing that we stood up for what is right, and when it truly mattered, stood up to make a difference. Utilizing Campbell's hero's journey gave Luke Skywalker a timeless appeal that allowed him to resonate with audiences of all ages, genders, and creeds. That's why, even if no other movie had ever been made, Star Wars would still be an iconic story that resonated with audiences for nearly half a century. But here's the thing. Despite the incredible character writing, at the end of A New Hope, Luke Skywalker, like many of the other characters, is still just an archetype. And sure, that worked well, and it showed us exactly why archetypes exist and are used so often. But Luke wasn't a complete character yet. He wasn't yet the standard for idealism and strength of character that he would become. That journey would be started in The Empire Strikes Back, where Luke's idealism would be challenged, forcing him to grow and evolve beyond the archetype established in A New Hope. Empire is often cited as the darkest of the original trilogy. The movie where the prospects of our heroes look the bleakest, where they are left on the back foot after the Empire has truly struck back. And I mean, this is shown right from the get-go, as Luke is left for dead out in the icy tundras of Hoth, and his recovery is interrupted as the Empire forces the rebellion to flee from their safe haven with an overwhelming ground assault. While fleeing the planet, Luke follows the spirit of Obi-Wan's guidance, and leaves the rebellion in search of Yoda, a wise Jedi Master who shall complete his training and help turn him into a Jedi Knight in full. But here's where the action splits, as Han, Leia, Chewie, and the droids are relentlessly pursued by Boba Fett on the Empire's orders, leading Han to seek refuge with an old friend, Lando Calrissian, one of the smoothest characters in the galaxy. This splitting of our heroes is crucial, as it shows us the relentless nature of the Empire as they forego lives and injuries in their pursuit of the Millennium Falcon, as well as their underhandedness in their dealings with Lando and the hiring of ruthless bounty hunters to accomplish their objectives. Meanwhile, Luke meets Yoda, who chastises him for being too focused on adventure and excitement, as well as being too angry and impatient to be trained as a Jedi. Luke has changed since A New Hope, but not enough. At his core, he still has too much of the farm boy from A New Hope within him. This is crucial for Luke, as well as us, the audience. It helps us to understand that Luke still has a long way to go as a character, and that the boy we meet in A New Hope needs to grow up if he's going to be ready to face the trials ahead of him. We also get a line from Yoda about Luke being too much like his father, which will be hugely important for later. The character change that Luke needs to undergo, that I mentioned before, begins with his first lesson.
Size matters not.
He has to learn to let go of his perceptions of the physical world and embrace the possibilities before him. In a cave rife with the dark side, Luke battles a phantom Vader, revealed to be himself, showing that if he lacks discipline and restraint, he too will fall down the dark path. The cave is a pivotal moment in Luke's journey, as it shows him, and by extension the audience, the dangers facing Luke if he doesn't learn discipline, and just how easy it would be for Luke to become the very thing he's fighting against if he isn't careful. But upon hindsight, and the benefit of many, many rewatches, the cave also symbolizes Luke's ability to fall to the dark side in the exact same manner his father did. A point that will become incredibly relevant when we get to Return of the Jedi. Luke's Jedi training is interrupted when he receives a vision of his friends being betrayed by Lando and getting caught by the Empire. Luke insists on putting his training on hold and going to help his friends, in a move that proves Yoda right in his every assessment of Luke. He is impatient. He is reckless. And his craving for action and adventure means that he's failing to see the bigger picture and the repercussions that will occur if he's captured or killed by the Empire. But Luke, at his core, places his friend's safety above all else. A move that shouldn't be surprising given how those close to him were ripped from him in such rapid succession in the last film. Luke believes he has the power to prevent that from happening, and as such, he's going to exercise that power. Only, it doesn't work out so well for him. Darth Vader springs his trap for Luke, takes his hand, and delivers the galaxy-shattering news that he is Luke's father, in a moment that is still felt throughout pop culture to this day. What is Luke's reaction to this news? He rejects it, out of hand. Well, out of stump. Yet, he refuses to take the easy way out and join Darth Vader in his quest for domination. Instead, he hurls himself into the unknown, choosing death over falling to the dark side. And this single act shows a bravery and strength of character that many of us can only ever aspire to. And Luke's strength is rewarded when he's rescued by the very friends he set out to rescue in the first place. Empire is where Luke Skywalker fails. But it doesn't just fail. By the end of the movie, it feels like he's failed in every way that a person can. He fails in protecting the rebellion on Hoth. He fails in his studies under Yoda. He fails to rescue his friends. He fails to even hold his own against Darth Vader. Through this failure, Luke Skywalker becomes the most human character in Star Wars. He shows us why fatal flaws are so often good in small amounts, but when they become dominating, they lead to disaster. Because Luke Skywalker's greatest flaw in Empire is also one of his most admirable traits. Luke Skywalker is loyal to his friends. And while that is good in moderation, when the time comes, he can't make the hard choice and choose what's really important. And the result is that after his friends have escaped, they have to put themselves back into danger to rescue him. Good intentions can have the most disastrous consequences when we let our emotions govern our actions. But the most important thing about Empire is that it allows Luke to fail. Empire allows Luke to make mistakes, to learn from them, so that we, the audience, can learn from them as well. Our hero isn't perfect, and that's okay, because neither are we. Our mistakes aren't as important as what we do after we've made them. This is such an important lesson for the audience, as it so clearly exemplifies how a hero is not defined by their failings, but by their perseverance. How they respond to their failures is how they are truly heroes. And it's Return of the Jedi, where we get to see how Luke has handled and grown from the events in Empire. If you had to ask me what makes Luke Skywalker the endearing pop culture icon he is, or was, as the case may be, I'd point to his journey throughout Return of the Jedi. For many older fans, this movie is their favorite, despite their logical understanding and acceptance that Empire is the better crafted film, because of Luke. When we're introduced to Luke, he set out to rescue Han from the clutches in a convoluted plan that shows him tapping into his darker nature. He's dressed all in black and force choking the Gamoran guards before threatening Jabba with death if he doesn't comply with Luke's demands. It's a far cry from the innocent farm boy we were first introduced to, and yet, It's so crucial for this film to show us just how close Luke actually is to embracing the dark side at this point in the war. While many malign the Han Solo rescue sequence, honestly kind of deservedly so considering how full of logical leaps it is, this sequence holds vital importance in the film, as without it, we don't have that nagging feeling in the back of our minds that maybe Luke might actually fall to the dark side. But that feeling of being unsure, of not knowing where Luke will ultimately end up, wouldn't be possible without equal displays of light and dark. And the scene Luke has with Leia on Endor, before he hands himself over to Darth Vader and the Emperor, is so critical, as we see that there is still a lot of the old Luke left. He convinces Leia that she's his sister and that her power is just as great as his, while also revealing the yearning within himself to just simply know his mother, to know his family, something that's been important to him since A New Hope, when Obi-Wan first told him about his father. Once he's handed himself over to Vader, Luke shows us just how important family is to him. He tells Darth Vader, arguably one of the most evil and reviled men in the galaxy, a man who tortured his friends, killed his mentor, and cut off Luke's own hand, that there is still good left in him, and that the Emperor has not yet managed to kill the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker. It's a declaration so profound and layered in such compassion for this monster, that all Vader can do is half-heartedly tell Luke that it's too late for him, before taking a quiet, contemplative moment to himself in order to ponder Luke's words. Here, we see for the first time the impact Luke's compassion can truly have, as we feel sorry for Vader, a monster and a villain. Luke's words momentarily break the Emperor's hold on Vader in such a subtle way, as we finally see to the core of Vader as a broken and defeated man as he utters those painful words.
It is too late for me, son.
Empire may be, in its totality, a masterclass in filmmaking, but the throne room sequence between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor is a shining masterclass in character writing, as the Emperor taunts Luke, preying on his fears and his strengths in equal measure in order to have him fall. George Lucas wrote the Emperor to be akin to the devil, a being of evil incarnate, and we see that all too clearly as he reveals the trap he set for Luke's friends and gleefully tells Luke his friends will die if he doesn't strike him down. And Luke, at his breaking point, finally snaps. He attacks the Emperor, only to be stopped by Darth Vader. His fatal flaw that we saw so clearly in Empire still has its claws in Luke. He will do whatever he must in order to protect his friends. As the duel between him and Vader progresses, Luke attempts to hide and bring himself back towards his Jedi training and the light side of the Force. But Darth Vader knows exactly what buttons to push. He preys on Luke's fears and doubts, and threatens to instead turn his sister Leia. And here we see Luke's true test in facing these Dark Lords of the Sith. As his anger bursts forth and he allows himself to fall slowly but surely into the dark side's eager arms, he batters Vader until Vader can take no more, before finally getting his revenge and taking Vader's hand. And it leads to one of my favorite scenes in the entire franchise. Seeing Vader's mechanical hand looking to his own, Luke finally understands all of the lessons he had to learn throughout this trilogy. He finally realizes how Darth Vader became the broken monster he is, by doing exactly what Luke was about to do. And in realizing this, Luke makes a decision that not only marks him at long last as a Jedi Knight, but also cements his place in the pantheon of pop culture juggernauts. He looks the devil himself in the eyes, throws away his weapon, his only defense, and tells him,
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Luke's words finally reach Vader, who throws the Emperor down a reactor shaft before getting to have one last conversation with his son. not as a monster in search of domination, but as a father who's witnessed his son do what he couldn't, and as a consequence, reach heights that he never could have. Luke's compassion and selflessness redeems Vader, not to the galaxy at large, but to the only being who truly matters in that moment: Luke, his son. Return of the Jedi marks the completion of Luke's journey as a character, as he has finally taken control over his flaws, proved himself a Jedi Master in full. He has surpassed the expectations of his teachers, who believed he had to kill Vader, as Vader could not be redeemed. And in doing so, Luke showed us, the audience, that we always have a choice. We can either choose to do what is easy, or we can choose to do what is right. And if we fail to make the correct choice, we aren't defined by that failure. Instead, we can do better. We can be better. All it takes is honesty with ourselves and the willingness to make the hard choice when it matters the most. Luke Skywalker endured for as long as he did because of the lessons he taught us, both from his successes and, more importantly, from his failures. So, after 32 years, imagine the excitement every Star Wars fan felt when we found out we were going to go on one last journey with this monumental icon. One last time. After 3 decades, the long-awaited sequel trilogy finally arrived. Fans eagerly awaited the continuation of Luke's journey, expecting to see the Jedi Master they had grown up with. Instead, what we got was a film, and in fact the sequel trilogy in general, that served only as a poorly done rip-off of the incredible tale woven in the original trilogy. But I don't want to get into that too much here, as I think that's a video on its own, maybe even several. So for now, all I'll say on The Force Awakens as it pertains to Luke is that it's a perfect example of cowardice and lack of planning on the part of the filmmakers and the studio. J.J. Abrams was too afraid that Luke was going to overshadow his thinly written characters, and as such, he instead opted to have Luke appear only in the final few seconds, allowing another filmmaker to try and figure out something to do with Luke instead. Not only was Luke sidelined, but the film also failed to do justice to Han and Leia, reducing them to shadows of their former selves. In The Force Awakens, Luke is alluded to as being of paramount importance to the story going forward, with vague hints and minor lines aimed at getting fans excited to see how his story would ultimately unfold. The consequence of this decision is that we spend the entire movie waiting for Luke to finally show up, but right as he does, the movie ends. Luke should have been the main character of The Force Awakens, giving us one last hurrah with those wonderfully written original trilogy characters, before passing the baton on to the new generation that they'd each kind of taken under their wing. Instead, JJ left 101 mystery boxes scattered throughout the film, and left Luke in the dust, promising instead that the new director would do something interesting with the character. And I suppose that's exactly what happened, from a certain point of view. With all the setup pointing to Luke being the key to the story, audiences were left with one burning question. What had happened to the legendary Jedi? The answer we got was nothing short of character assassination. The Last Jedi has been a contentious film ever since its release in 2017. Audiences had anticipated answers to the questions left by The Force Awakens, only to instead be given a muddled, poorly constructed and plotted film that actively worked to spit in the face of fans, all in a misguided attempt to subvert expectations. A phrase that no doubt sends shivers down the spines of Star Wars fans even to this day. And nowhere is this disregard for what came before more apparent in the film's handling of one of the greatest icons of cinema ever devised, Luke Skywalker. The Last Jedi paints a picture of Luke Skywalker who bears little to no resemblance to the character that enraptured audiences so many decades ago. Instead, we find a broken down shell of a man who has cut himself off from the Force, the galaxy, and his very family, standing in stark opposition to the character whose greatest flaw was personal loyalty. No longer is Luke Skywalker a wise and benevolent Jedi Master. Instead, he's a grumpy old hermit who wants nothing to do with anyone, who wishes to see the Jedi die with him, and who's content to allow the galaxy to burn due to his own failings. He refuses to train a young girl, Rey, who is considered to be the new hope to free the galaxy from tyranny, instead going out of his way to teach her that the Jedi way is wrong, and that the Jedi themselves need to end. Rian Johnson completely disregards the fact that the Jedi way extolled to us throughout the prequels and the original trilogy was one of selflessness and compassion. A way of life that intended Jedi to leave the galaxy better off than when they found it. Instead, he fixated on the flaws of the prequel-era Jedi, and concluded that the entire institution was fundamentally broken. And maybe this new spin on Luke Skywalker could have worked, if we had seen how he got to this place. If we had followed him on his downward journey, experiencing each blow, until we finally came to understand how the symbol of never giving up in the face of adversity, the inspiration to millions of people across the globe, had found himself in such a dark, dark place. Instead, we're given two short flashbacks that serve not to explain Luke's character progression, but rather to assassinate one of the most beloved characters in cinema history. Luke Skywalker sensed darkness in the dreams of his nephew Ben Solo, and in a moment of weakness, drew his lightsaber to strike him down and end the darkness he foresaw. He was willing to kill his family, his own flesh and blood, over a few nightmares. This creates such incongruity with the character that generations of children had grown up with for over 30 years, as to leave no doubt in the minds of the audience that Disney didn't care about Star Wars and the stories that made it so beloved. Instead, they only cared about how much money they could make. How could the man who saw good in Darth Vader, the most heinous and evil man in the galaxy, a man who in real life was modeled after German authoritarianism in World War II, look at a young boy having a nightmare and consider murdering him in cold blood? Rian Johnson gave us a character so different from the one we'd last seen that even the actor portraying him, Mark Hamill, had to think of this new interpretation as an entirely different character. And when the galaxy needs Luke Skywalker the most, instead of arriving in person to fix his mistakes and do what needs to be done, as the old Luke would have, this new character instead decides to project an image of himself across the galaxy, killing himself instead of helping to ensure that his friends, family, and many other innocent lives were saved. With Luke's death, we are robbed of an opportunity to see his grief at Han's death, robbed of a poignant reunion with the sister he cared so much for, a true reunion, and robbed of a chance to see this once great man return to his former glory and display the qualities and powers that made him an icon even within the Star Wars universe itself. To say that fans of Luke Skywalker put him on a grand pedestal and held him near and dear to their hearts would be an understatement. The Last Jedi serves as a testament to one man's misguided attempt to tear down a symbol of selflessness and innate goodness, to plant him firmly in the mud and make the audience that had once revered this great character watch as he wallows in his own misery, forgetting in his blind obsession that the audience had already seen Luke at his lowest point and watched him stand up, dust himself off, and vow to do better. Rian Johnson wanted the message of his film to be one of moving past failure and correcting your mistakes while not allowing that failure to define you. But in his blind obsession with delivering that message, he destroyed one of the greatest examples of that very message ever put to screen, and instead undid all of the work from the original trilogy. All the growth, learning, and moving past failure that was achieved in that legendary story, all to, subvert the expectations of fans who wanted to see the hero they'd grown up with one last time? Ironically, in his attempt to tell a story about learning from failure, Rian Johnson ignored Luke's most defining trait, his ability to grow beyond his mistakes. Instead of showing Luke as a man who'd already overcome his darkest moments, the film resets him to square one, erasing all of his growth in the progress. Rian Johnson's failure in the handling of Star Wars was confirmed and cemented in the very next film, when J.J. Abrams took back control and buried Rian Johnson's film with a series of retcons and recontextualizations that further served to break the character of Luke Skywalker in what would ultimately turn out to be his final ever cinematic outing. The Rise of Skywalker is a reactionary film. Lucasfilm was left stunned by the polarizing reactions to The Last Jedi, and in an attempt to course correct, brought back the man who had provided the launching pad for Star Wars' destruction. What we as an audience were left with was a movie that operated at a breakneck speed, threw characters on pointless escapades to keep the plot moving, and retconned so much of the last film that from a story perspective, one could skip The Last Jedi in its entirety and miss next to nothing. Fans of The Last Jedi were left seething with rage over the Rise of Skywalker's treatment of their favorite Star Wars film, while those who disparaged The Last Jedi took a perverse glee in seeing this new film put the final nail in the coffin of that last outing. By the time the credits rolled, no one was happy. Especially not after the half-hearted attempt to put Luke Skywalker back where he belonged. Every criticism aimed at Luke's betrayal in The Last Jedi was addressed. Him so cavalierly tossing his father's lightsaber over his shoulder, acknowledged as disrespectful. Him staying on the island of Ahch-To and not helping the galaxy at large, an admitted mistake. Cutting himself off from the Force, admitted mistake. And the final nail in the coffin of this once great character, the admission that his X-Wing was in perfect order, and he really did choose to kill himself rather than help his friends and family. In attempting to bandage over the mistakes of the last film and appease the fans of Luke Skywalker, J.J. Abrams instead created a Frankenstein's monster of a character with no through line throughout the trilogy and no reason to be other than for Lucasfilm to cash in on the name recognition. Instead of one last ride into the sunset, we're given a character who stands in absolute antithesis to everything he once held dear. Then at the last moment, he makes a giant U-turn as if to say, don't worry, ignore all that. He's still the character you once knew and loved, and the result of poor planning of Lucasfilm. The conflicting visions of two directors, and a 3-decade-long wait to see Luke Skywalker go on one last adventure, Star Wars fans have never recovered. Every project is now as polarizing as The Last Jedi. Creators hurl insults at the fans who spend their hard-earned money on this once-beloved franchise in the hopes that maybe this time, just once, things will be better. Luke Skywalker was more than just a character in a sci-fi movie. He was an icon, a beacon of hope, perseverance, and selflessness. Through the original trilogy, we saw him struggle, fall, and rise again, teaching generations of fans that no failure is permanent, and that heroism is a choice, not a birthright. But the sequel trilogy failed to understand that legacy. Instead of honoring Luke Skywalker, it deconstructed him to the point of unrecognizability. And in doing so, it fractured not just the story of Star Wars, but the fan base itself. Star Wars was once a story about destiny, redemption, and the power of hope. Today, it's a franchise adrift, caught between creative indecision and corporate greed. Maybe one day, Star Wars will find its way again. Maybe we'll remember why it mattered in the first place. But until then, fans will continue searching for the story that once inspired them. A story about a farm boy who refused to give up. A story about hope. Man, having to rehash all of this to kind of do the research for the script, it just reminds me how pointless it all was. You know, how angry I was back in the day. Like, Star Wars was one of those franchises. Like, don't get me wrong, I've been a comic book guy my whole life. Like, I used to have Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire version, on VHS. I used to have the, like, Spider-Man the animated series from the 90s. God, what a time. Also on VHS. Like comic book heroes were my thing, but Star Wars was something so fucking special. I watched it so often, over and over. It was so incredible to see this inspiring story, ultimately. And it's just so typical of the modern day and age that it had to be tore down to make way, you know? And it's tiring, man. I want the Luke Skywalker I watched on TV and read in books like Legacy of the Force or the Thrawn trilogy. Like, I don't think it should have been that hard. And it's that very fact that has kind of crippled Star Wars. And I don't think it ever recovers, unfortunately. But hey, we'll always have those 6 films in the Clone Wars. All the books written, all the comics, the Dark Empire stuff. Oh, yeah. Thank you for watching.